Welcome or welcome back to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I'm Phyllis Zimbler-Miller.
Today we're looking at what is happening in American universities after Hamas brutally slaughtered men, women, and children in an unprovoked attack on Israel. Today's focus will be on Harvard University, considered the most prestigious college in the United States. Our guest today is Jacob Howland, Provost and Director of the Intellectual Foundations Program at the University of Austin, Texas. In recent days, he published an important rebuttal to the statement signed by 31 students' organizations from Harvard College, the Divinity School, the Law School, the Medical School, and the Kennedy School of Government that holds Israel's Israeli regime entirely responsible for all unfolding violence. From my experience, Dr. Howland, and by the way, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
From my experience, before emigrating to the United States from the Netherlands in 2006, due to the rising anti-Semitism in Europe, my experience was what starts at universities ends up at front doors. This is why what is happening in universities in the United States is so very important right now. To begin our discussion, can you please give us an overview of what happened at Harvard and why you felt compelled to respond?
Sure. But let me first say, I think you're absolutely right that what starts at universities doesn't stay there. And when you have students who are formed, or let's say inculcated with certain kinds of doctrines of postmodernism, where essentially truth is held to be relative, even scientific truth is understood to be a social construction, moral standards are understood to be social constructions, and certain even more pernicious doctrines, critical theory, intersectionality, decolonization, right, are shared with these students, and they're sort of steeped in this atmosphere. That has consequences. Those students don't leave their schooling behind when they leave the university. And we saw, in fact, I think it was at the University of Wisconsin, the Students for Justice in Palestine made posters. And one of the posters said, do you think decolonization is just an abstract theory? No, it's a tangible event. And they were praising Hamas for showing what decolonization means in practice. And in practice, it means, as you know, burning families alive, raping, murdering, killing, kidnapping, shooting, knifing. So you're absolutely right. Ideas and words matter, as Mark Rowan wrote in his letter to the University of Pennsylvania. Now, but let's go back to Harvard. So Harvard, as you said, over 30 student groups. And in fact, I initially thought it was 31. I'm given to understand there were 34. It's unclear even how many, but over 30 groups wrote, student groups, that Israel was entirely to blame. They depicted the Palestinian people. I don't believe they mentioned Hamas. They depicted the Palestinian people as victims in spite of the atrocious deeds of Hamas, which governs Gaza. And that was bad enough. But the president of Harvard has had three public statements to deal with this, and she still hasn't gotten it right. So on October 9th, president of Harvard, a woman named Claudine Gay, wrote very tepid criticism. She said, and I'm quoting here, while our students have the right to speak for themselves, no student group, not even 30 student groups, speaks for Harvard University or its leadership. This is 2 days after the attacks. She doesn't mention the attack on Israel. She doesn't mention the name of Hamas. The next day, try number 2, she said, "We've heard from many students, faculty, and staff about the emotional toll these events are taking." Okay. Again, no specific condemnation of these virulently anti-Semitic attacks. Finally, she distributed a video. I have a friend who graduated from Harvard, and she described it as a hostage video because the president of Harvard was compelled to do this video. And the video itself, she says, "Our university rejects terrorism." Great. She said, "The barbaric atrocities committed by Hamas," she includes those, that's good. "Our university rejects hate." And then she says, "Hate of Jews, hate of Muslims." Now, if you didn't have context, you might think that the Harvard students had vociferously attacked Muslims, right, as well as Jews. What's going on there? Well, let me say a couple of things. First of all, I can talk about the other Ivy League universities, but the other Ivy League universities and elite universities have had the same kinds of problems. They have professors and administrators and students who are ideologically radicalized, who are vociferous. And the fact is that on those campuses, you have these loud voices. And then the majority of students have learned not even to have opinions, not even to share their opinions, because they don't want to be attacked for saying the wrong thing or thinking the wrong thing or what have you. So these folks have an outsized influence, but the problem is that the universities, having gone in this direction for decades, now have on their campuses groups of students who are support violence, who are inclined to loud demonstrations, inclined to make all sorts of trouble, and the presidents feel like they have to walk a very thin line. So I think this is extremely important. I'm happy. I'll stop now, but I'm happy to talk about some of the other universities: Cornell, Penn, Columbia, other elite schools like Stanford. They've all had these kinds of problems recently.
And why did you feel compelled to respond?
Well, let me say this. I've known for a long time that universities are broken. I was at the University of Tulsa for 32 years. That school decided a few years ago to eliminate 40% of its academic programs. And almost all the languages, philosophy and religion, which was my department, even hard sciences, chemistry, physics, things like this. There were various reasons for that, but it was an attack on the liberal arts, which have sort of been, fewer and fewer students are enrolling in the liberal arts and humanities. There are economic reasons for this and others, but it's those studies where we preserve, study, transmit, and extend the knowledge and wisdom of the past that humanize us, that alert us to, that introduce us to fundamental human values. It's those kinds of studies that allow us to receive the precious inheritance of the past, the hard-won learning of prior generations. So that was a problem. Now we see, and I should also say, of course, I observed, very left-leaning, let's say progressive attitudes on campus that were predisposed against the study of the tradition. Why? Because we live in a culture of repudiation, cultural repudiation. As Roger Scruton has said, the past is not something to be cherished and studied and learned from, but to be criticized and to be judged and to be condemned. These events have exposed more clearly than anything else in my lifetime the utter bankruptcy of American higher education. You see, universities were set up to preserve, transmit, and extend knowledge, including wisdom, sound judgment.
And what about the past of Mao's cultural revolution, and what about the past of the Soviet Union? Because it's those ideologies that they adopt now, Marxist ideology.
Yes.
But what about the past of Marxism? It was terrible. It was horrible.
There's no question about it. Look, the Black Book of Communism, which was composed by several leading French academics, has calculated that in the 20th century, roughly 100 million men, women, and children were killed by their own regimes in communist countries. China, you mentioned, I think it's like 60 million. I mean, it's unbelievable. What do these regimes have in common? This culture of repudiation, this culture of, let me add it, here's another thing about universities, reductivism. So I'll give you an example. If you are schooled in postmodernism, you learn that fundamental social relationships, even within the family, between different communities, political relationships, are all games of power and domination. If you look at intersectionality, I remember I found in my old university in a Xerox machine something that the sociology department had, and it was a chart.
Wait, your current or their past?
The old past university.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, yes. A document that listed, right, if you are white, you are dominant. If you are not white, you are victimized. If you are healthy, you are dominant. If you are sick, you're victimized. If you are obese, you're victimized. If you're so, in other words, all of these things, and it's what I would call a zero-sum game. I mean, a zero-sum game is one where if I win, you lose. That's not the way a family works. That's not the way a society works when it's healthy. We all win. We all participate. So, yeah.
I have experienced in Holland that all of Holland was pro-Israel, pro-Zionist during the wars in the 60s and the 70s that Israel had to fight. And when I went to college at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, that was the first place I ever saw in Holland that was radically anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and anti-Semitic. So, and from there, and I thought, okay, that's university. But from there, it went to the cultural elite. And from there, it went to the media. And from there, it went to the general population. And from there, it went to the politicians. So that's my fear about America. America is currently not that anti-Semitic. Yeah. And I mean, the lowest country in the world in terms of the amount of anti-Semitism. And it's very, very supportive of Israel, which is crucial for Israel. But if universities start to flip, then what's going to happen with the support of Israel, or the support of America for Israel?
I'd like to read right now a quote from Jacob himself, because it's very telling. In this article, he said, "Progressive liberals have now given birth to a generation of demonic ideologues who excuse sheer evil. Reading the joint statement by Harvard Palestine solidarity groups on the situation in Palestine, I can only hope that many Harvard faculty are appalled at the little monsters they've helped to create," unquote. That says in 2 sentences the nutshell of the problem.
Yeah, look, well, the horrible thing is that especially the elite universities have already significantly flipped. And their graduates have gone out and taken jobs in, for example, education. And let me say here, I have a statistic somewhere on this. See if I can find this quickly here. It's something like the top 11 schools. Oh, well, somebody did a study of political science, okay? And it turns out that the top 11 schools, something like 50%, I don't have the number in front of me exactly right now, of all the professors of political science around the country came from the top 11 schools. That is, they got their PhDs. So those schools, those elite schools, the Ivy League, Stanford, places like this, you know, Duke, Georgetown, whatever the top ones, have an outsized influence because they are the ones with the big PhD programs. They educate people. They then become professors. Okay. So we see things at, for example, at Cornell, where a professor said, if you're not excited and thrilled by Hamas, you know, you're not even human. He said this. We see a professor at the University of Michigan who, as you know, as it was the case during the Intifada in the early 2000s, when 2,000 Israelis were killed roughly by terrorist bombs and bus bombs and things like this, there were posters with individual names and faces. I had the poster on my door at my old university. Now people are putting up posters of the kidnapped Israelis. Professor at the University of Michigan, smirkingly tearing them down, okay? So number one, we get these professors and they reproduce themselves. Then we have people going out into, for example, media, where they also have a possibility of inculcating others with this ideology. Is it a mistake that the New York, is it not a mistake, is it a surprise that the New York Times and the Washington Post, these are two leading newspapers with influence around the world, immediately printed that the Israelis were responsible for a missile that struck a hospital and killed 500 people? Not even close. It wasn't 500 people. It didn't hit the hospital. It hit the parking lot. And it wasn't the Israelis.
Exactly.
Why is that? Because they're already predisposed. And by the way, this is the horrible thing. Israel is called a colonial project. It's not a colonial project. Colonial project, and we can have a whole discussion about colonialism and the benefits or you know, bad things about it. But England was a colonial country. The sun never set on the British Empire.
Right. The expression.
The Jews who founded Israel, the sun sets on Israel. Israel's a tiny little country. I'm sure you've been there. I've been there 4 times. It doesn't desire to take over the world. It desires to have this homeland that belonged to the Jewish people many thousands of years ago. Okay. So we get these people and they're against Israel because they want to tar it with the brush of European colonialism and so on and so forth. Then let's take culture. People have graduated from these universities. They become museum curators. They become, directors of museums and so forth. And you can find, if you go to the Metropolitan Museum or you go to, major museums around the country, you can see exhibits that will explain to you, this art is white supremacy, colonialist, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm saying, Evelyn, is that they've gone there, they have gone out into the culture. They are out there. Now, there is a moment here of opportunity. And that is that the American people can look and say, we can't go on this way, because as I was saying, universities without higher education today, okay, real higher education, real universities, we wouldn't even have civilization. Because where would you get scholars? Let's say we ended all the universities, which, by the way, some people have claimed we ought to do, like no more university, just have vocational schools. Who's going to study the past? Who's going to write the histories? Who's going to uncover the documents? Who's going to analyze these things? Who's going to preserve, extend, and transmit the knowledge and wisdom of the past? So we need universities. Now people understand that they're actually anti-civilization. It's not just that they're not doing their job. They are anti-civilization because they are spreading these ideologies that are destructive of civilization. So we have to repair our universities. We have to do that. I would suggest it's a moment kind of like during COVID. A lot of schools were closed, as you know. And at the same time, parents got to see what the students were being taught on the Zoom.
Yes.
And since then, many people have left public school. Many people are homeschooling. Many people are doing classical academies. This, by the way, is across the religions. The Tikva Fund is working in schools, and they're interested in, you know, Jewish education. We've got Christian academies, we've got classical academies, we've got charter schools. We're going to need a moment like that on the university level as well. And that's really why I wrote this, is because we need to take stock of what's actually happening in this country, and we need to fix the problems.
Can you tell us, please, a little bit about the University of Austin, Texas?
Yes. So the University of Austin was founded 2 years ago. And it was founded by a group of people, including a former president of St. John's College, who realized that universities had become these centers of indoctrination. They were not doing what they were supposed to do. They weren't genuinely educating people and preparing students to be leaders and citizens who can rebuild civilization in the event that it needs to be rebuilt, who can sustain it, who can participate meaningfully and in sensible ways in a democratic society, and so forth. We have designed a very innovative curriculum, I think. So I'm the director or the dean of the Intellectual Foundations program, and that's a program where all freshmen and sophomores take courses of a sort of classical liberal arts nature, okay? And they extend from courses in natural science and mathematics, but also, and this is really fundamental, courses that focus on the big questions. For example, we have a course called Chaos and Civilization. Where did civilization come from? What are its origins? What is it for? What does it do? We read Genesis, we read Hesiod, we read Homer, we read Aeschylus, we read Plato. A course called The Beginning of Politics. What is politics? Are we just a band of wolves? Are we political animals? What is a healthy political community? We read Exodus, some selections from Samuel, you know, the David story. We read Herodotus, we read, you know, and again, Greeks and Jews. Then we have a course on Christianity and Islam, okay? And how they fit and how do they relate to European identity and to the West and to the East and so forth. We have a course on modernity. What is modernity? So once we there's a kind of historical arc, right? We get to the moderns. What's modernity? What did we reject? Because you really there's a sense in which we are moderns, for better or worse, and we have to understand what that means and what the costs of that, as well as the advantages. A course on ideology, ideological experiments in the 20th century. A course on the American experience, the American experiment. A course on technology, right? The advantages and disadvantages of technology, very big stuff. So the whole idea here, and I could go on, but the whole idea is to give people a foundation that allows them to understand what it means to be a human being, that gets them to take seriously the idea that there might be transcendent measures, moral, spiritual measures, transcendent truths that we can relate to, and that prepares them, and here's the turn, for the future. Because the other part of our program, and one of our big values here, is not just to educate students, but to get them to take that education into the world and to make things better, to work for the common good. So we have something called the Polaris Project, named after the North Star, which is the idea is to determine something that will serve a human need, that will serve the human good, and to undertake that. And it could be you want to start some kind of urban renewal project, or you want to develop a piece of medical technology, or you want to you want to do an oral history of your family and where they came from, whatever. And the idea there is that the people who are going to give birth to a humane future have to know what human beings are, have to know what human flourishing is, and have to be oriented outward. So we try to combine past and future in this way. And I think it's a very exciting model. And we are committed to academic freedom. We will discuss the undiscussable, mention the unmentionable, in the classroom. You can take a position without fear, as long as you are willing to submit it to advance arguments and to submit it to discussion and debate. That's what college should be.
That's great. And from what I understand, people like Barry Weiss, Neil Ferguson, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and others are affiliated with this
Yes.
university. So there is pushback. You are one of the people pushed back in the media against Harvard University for not responding harshly enough against such blatant anti-Semitism and applauding of mass murder by the students. What are some examples of well-known alumni who have made statements against this horrifying support of mass murderers?
Well, I'll give you some examples. There's a man named Bill Ackman, who's the CEO of Pershing Square Capital Management, a big hedge fund. He wrote that he and others have pledged that they won't hire Harvard students who signed that letter. Ken Griffin, a billionaire who gave $400 million to Harvard, has indicated that he is, as far as I know, not going to give more money. Leslie Wexner of the Wexner Foundation has cut ties with Harvard over their failure to condemn Hamas. I should say, by the way, here, though, you see, Harvard has something like a $30 or $35 billion endowment. And somebody told me the other day, I can't verify this, but it's probably roughly right, that the total number of dollars that have now been withdrawn, that is to say, or let me put it this way, if you add up everything that was given to Harvard by the people who've now said they're not going to support Harvard, it comes out to about $500 million. Okay. Now, true, we're discounting future gifts. Let's multiply by 2. It's $1 billion, let's say, right? These people in particular. It's $1 billion. That's $1 billion. What's $1 billion when you have 30 billion or $35 billion?
Yes.
But I continue. Penn. We haven't talked about Penn, but Penn had this horrible Palestine rights conference, and all kinds of anti-Semitic things were said there. And then the Penn students, have been marching and condemning Israel and supporting Hamas and so on. So Ronald Lauder, who is he's the head of the World Jewish Congress, has said that he's withdrawing financial support from Penn. Mark Rowan, who is the CEO of Apollo, and he's a billionaire, and he wrote an incredible letter to Penn saying, words and ideas matter. And you guys have just allowed this anti-Semitism to fester. John Huntsman of the Huntsman Foundation has halted his support for the University of Pennsylvania. Penn doesn't have as big an endowment, but I guarantee you it's in the billions. It's probably 8 or 10 billion, if I had to guess, But Harvard, of course, is the really big boy on the block. So, there have been other letters too. It's very interesting. I have around here a letter somewhere. I won't find it right now. It doesn't matter, but written by a man named Fred Bauman. Fred Bauman was one of the most distinguished alumni of Cornell University. He's now old. He may be high 70s, something like this. And he teaches at Kenyon College. He's taught there for many, many years. And he wrote a letter to the president of Cornell, who had failed to condemn Hamas and to speak out frankly on this. And I don't know if there was a connection, but immediately after receiving this letter, she made what I consider to be the strongest statement of any of the Ivy League presidents condemning Hamas. I may have it here somewhere. Let's see. She issued a statement denouncing, quote, statements glorifying the evilness of Hamas terrorism. And that's about as direct as you get from these presidents. At Stanford, they said, this is a university where, like many American universities, they had a comment on everything, George Floyd and so on. And incidentally, my old university, when President Trump gets elected, how many people, students should go for counseling if they're worried and anxious and those kind of, okay, so they talk about everything. Stanford said, we don't comment. We're too busy with the business of education. Wow, now they're learning,
Right. This is an argument that I read. People say if universities shouldn't be in the business of commenting, but once you comment for other things, how can you not comment here? I think there's a very important thing to talk about.
This is exactly it. And let me say this about UATX. UATX, we believe that politics, far from being the operating system of a university, which it has become, should be, I'm talking about small p politics. I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican. Keep it out of the classroom. Now, let me be clear. if you're reading Exodus and you're beginning to understand what's happening here, as a professor, I'm very excited when students say, well, gosh, that reminds me of what's happening today over here. And how does it apply, right? That's very different from my saying, boys and girls, you'll get extra credit if you go to the rally today.
Or get released from your class early to go to the.
Exactly. And it's very different from a university president saying, we take the following stance. And I think you're absolutely right, Phyllis. It is our policy to transcend politics. And, we are not going to comment. We are not going to come out there and get on that road, because as soon as you say anything, you've got to speak about everything. And I think it's a very dangerous thing. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. But I think that's it's very unwise to do what they have done, because now they're in a trap.
I want to switch for a little bit and ask you, so for university supporters of what I'm going to call pure hate on campus, do they get outside funding? I mean, one of the alumni trustee on Penn's whatever board it is sent a letter yesterday to those of us, and there was a half a sentence that I couldn't believe about the festival, the literature festival, which it said it was on campus, organized by outside organization. And that's an exact quote, though I don't have it in front of me. Why would you allow an outside organization to invite, I forget the huge number of speakers that were allowed? I just don't understand that.
Yeah, look, you ask a really good question. I'm not really in a position to answer it with any specifics about, for example, Students for Justice in Palestine. I will guarantee you that they get outside funding. This is, all you have to do is look at for example, posters that they put up at various universities. These are professionally produced, high quality stuff. By the way, it would be bad enough if it were paid for by student activity funds or things like that at the university, right? If they're printing documents saying Israelis alone are to be blamed for genocide and so forth. With university funds, that's very bad. But as to your question, like, why would they do this? First of all, we already understand that this whole sort of atmosphere of, like, Palestinian writers and the underdogs and so forth, that's very popular at universities, right? So sort of on its face, it would look like, oh, we're giving voice to people who, are marginal or underrepresented or something like that. Universities tend to look kindly at money that's going to be spent on their campuses. They don't always look into it. By the way, I'm not incidentally trying to excuse Penn. For all I know, they knew exactly what they were going to say. I have no idea. But so then if someone comes along and says, hey, look, some of your professors at Penn want to have a conference on Palestinian literature, and we'll underwrite it for $100,000. I don't know who approved that, but it could have been somebody in the administration said, oh, that sounds good. It's a story that I hope comes out and that should be investigated. But as far as outside money, yes, outside money flows throughout our culture. I mean, I remember seeing demonstrations in the Middle East about something. I don't even remember what event it was. And people were holding signs that they clearly hadn't written. I can tell the difference between a homemade sign and all these things like America is the great Satan or something, you know what I mean? Who all of a sudden gave, let's say, 5,000 Lebanese people, a signs that says America's a great Satan? Outside money. Now, who are they? Could be anybody, could be anybody. It could be anybody who's hostile to the United States. It could even be, in some cases, Americans who have their own agendas, who supply these things.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to follow the money for these endeavors that are subverting our Western values at universities.
That's a great point.
Yeah. We also know that Students for Justice in Palestine was founded by Hamas affiliated people. So it would be a good, and they have 200 branches in the United States, about 200. So it would be a good idea to follow the money and see whether anything interesting comes up.
I'm actually reminded of the fact that President Biden has taken a fairly strong stand, but at the same time, he said that we're going to give $100 million in aid to the people of Gaza. Now, if the future is like the past, a great deal of that money will be diverted to Hamas.
Exactly.
We ourselves may be paying for some of these things, if you see what I'm saying.
Exactly.
It could be you and I with our tax money. I don't know. But I think it's very important to track these things down and to bring them to light.
Right.
Transparency is necessary here.
Right. Same thing in Europe. A lot of European money went to terrorist organization where it was meant to be used for humanitarian goals. Another question: what advice do you have, Jacob, for all our listeners as to how they can help turn this tide of terrifying college intellectual actions?
Well, I think it's very important for people to know that alumni have a lot of influence if they can be organized and if they are outspoken. Your listeners, I'm sure, a very high percentage are college students or college alumni. I guess I would say try to keep abreast of what is actually happening on your campus. And that's fairly easy to do. You can look in the student newspapers, they're online. You can look at the stuff that's sent out, and you can get a pretty good idea. And when you see behaviors that are antithetical to the mission of the university, that are hateful, that are anti-Semitic and so forth, you should communicate it. You need to call them on that. And if you are part of an alumni organization, you should contact your former classmates. And because if one person says it, and again, Harvard is the tough case, right? I mean, if some billionaire says, I'm not going to give you any more money, so what? You only gave us $100 million. Now that sounds like a lot to you or me, but not to Harvard. But if you had 20 billionaires and 100 people whose wealth is in the hundreds of millions telling Harvard, we're not going to do anything, now you have their attention. Now you have their attention. It can be kind of exhausting, to fight against these things. But if people really want to stand up against the tide, you've got to tell the universities no more. Don't do it. You can't do this. I did that. So I graduated from Swarthmore College. My wife and I have given Swarthmore, I would ask, we only give them like $100 a year, but we've been doing it for 40 years, roughly. Maybe a little less. Maybe when I was in graduate school, we didn't. But if I had to guess, it'd be $2,000-$3,000 over the years. They don't care about me, but I did communicate with the president. And when she never responded to me, I finally wrote and I said, because this was one of the places where the Students for Justice in Palestine were acting up. And she didn't condemn them. She said something mealy-mouthed about like, it's the usual give and take of discourse or whatever she said. I don't care. So I said to her, I'm not going to give you any more money. That's it. We're not giving you any more money. Now, I'm sure she doesn't care at all about me, like zero. But what if 1,000 people did that? Yeah.
Let me just say one thing, because we're coming to the end of the show and we're going to give you last thoughts. But for those of you who don't know about this, one way of getting notified is to sign up through Alums for Campus Fairness. We've had Avi Gordon on. So when all this stuff started to happen at Penn, I got the information from Campus Fairness about what was going on at Penn. And we've had several petitions. And again, do they care? But at least we are kept abreast of what's happening in our college. So I definitely recommend that as an easy way of knowing what's happening. And as we wrap up, we want to give you, is there anything, final statement you want to say to encourage people to do something? Call to action.
Yeah, look, I think more broadly, this has been, so we're recording this conversation. It's Thursday. It's not even 2 weeks since the attacks of October 7th. These weeks have been incredibly difficult for all Jewish people, and not just Jews, for people who truly understand what is at stake here. This is a moment of civilizational reckoning. So I'm stepping beyond in this comment here, American higher education, and saying, now is not the time to remain silent. Now is the time to do whatever you can to be heard. And because we don't want to regret standing on the sidelines when should the worst happen. And if not now, when, right? If not me, who? These are the old questions. And let's take them seriously.
Thank you so much. I mean, it kind of brought me to tears because Elle and I do a lot of stuff also about the Holocaust education and, bystanders versus upstanders. Had the world been more of an upstander instead of a bystander before? Who knows? But now it's our responsibility. We can learn for history and we need to do something. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for our listeners. Those of you who want to know more about Evelyn and myself and our show, go to Never Again Is Now podcast, which is on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And as we end every show, we say, please, without putting yourself in physical harm, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.